Hey guys, I'm Ken with Six Cakes and More, and today we are going to go over some tips just for you to successfully bake recipes. This doesn't have to do with any particular recipe, just in general, some tips so that no matter what you're making, you can have the best results possible. Tip number one, follow the recipe. I know that sounds like obvious, but a lot of people I see just grab just the ingredient list and go from there, which isn't gonna cause you problems. Or they'll pull a bunch of techniques from a bunch of different recipes and try to just throw them all together and expect some miraculous type of invention that always works. The recipe does not just consist of the ingredients. It's also your whole technique section, your directions. That is a part of the recipe. A lot of times I see people when they'll see some beautiful picture of something and they'll go, whose recipe did you use, or what recipe did you use? And they'll screenshot a picture just of the ingredients. That's not really gonna help you. Yes, you're gonna know what they used, but the important part is the directions. It is the technique. So make sure that whenever you're seeing a recipe, you're reading all the way through. You're gonna know what to do and how to do it. And that's one thing that I really try to keep, no matter how simple the recipe may seem or the ingredients may seem. I try to keep all of our step-by-step pictures on our blog, so you know each and every way what something should look like. This is also gonna help whenever a problem happens or something is not turning out right, you're gonna know exactly where that problem started and how to fix it. All right, second thing I'm gonna talk about is an oven thermometer. Now, I know your oven generally has the display on it and you can see what temperature you've typed in. But no matter how new or old your oven is, the temperature that is displaying on here is not the same temperature that it's actually at. It can and usually will run a couple of degrees off. And believe it or not, a 5-degree difference, even above or below what you should be baking something at, make it not turn out how you're wanting it to. So there's two different types of oven thermometers you can have. Got this little one here. You can get these at like most grocery stores and even on Amazon, but this one is probably your cheapest route to go with it. But this is number 3 for me over the course of a year. So get what you pay for. And since it's not digital, you also can get a little bit in between on some numbers and not be knowing exactly where you're at. Now, your other option would be a digital thermometer. It's got a timer and a thermometer. The cool thing is you can set it to where you want it to be, and it'll like beep at you if it goes over that. But these are really good, and it's got a little magnet on the back so you can just like stick it onto your oven. I like to stick mine on my microwave. That way it's a little easier to read. But you just put it in your oven, and you can put this wherever in your oven you want it to, and see if you have any hot spots. That's another good thing about a thermometer in your oven, because if your cakes are baking up lopsided or even your macarons, you've probably got a hot spot in your oven, which I do. So I know my right side gets a whole lot hotter than my left side. Thermometer. Great for knowing exactly what temperature you're baking at, and it's gonna help all of your baked goods come out a whole lot more successfully. Number 3 is we're gonna talk about some butter. I know this is like a huge topic of discussion, and people swear that salted versus unsalted makes no difference, but I beg to differ, and I know a whole lot of food bloggers who will beg to differ as well. So I always use unsalted butter when I bake. Reason number 1 is salted butter. You can't brand to brand. You don't know actually how much salt flavor they're putting in their butter. So you might buy one salted butter one day, and the salted butter you buy the next day will seem much saltier. Another big reason, salted butter has a higher liquid content in it than unsalted butter does. That matters a lot with things like sugar cookies, for instance. You always want those no spread cookies. Well, I wouldn't use salted butter in my recipe and my cookies spread, and I need to know why. Because you used salted butter and that affected the moisture content in your final dough. So I'm gonna show you one little thing that I've noticed. Here I am with 3 different kinds in my fridge. But I have Land O'Lakes, I have Publix, and I have Walmart's Great Value brand. Now, Walmart and Sam's are, I mean, we know they're the same company, but even between Walmart's Great Value and Sam's has their members mark, I've noticed that Sam's unsalted butter has a little bit more liquid content than Walmart's unsalted butter. Publix is also a little bit higher in water content from what I've noticed. And Land O'Lakes, I honestly don't really use them very much because I tend to find the cheapest one I can. And Land O'Lakes is a little higher, but I haven't really noticed a big issue with their unsalted butter. But 9 times out of 10, I use Sam's and Walmart, but I know when I use Sam's, I may have to add a little bit extra flour because it does have a little bit higher water content. Now, that is gonna be something that you have to kind of keep track of for you, because I know everybody shops somewhere different and like everybody uses a different brand of supermarket butter and whatnot. But that is one thing to keep in mind. But no matter what, you can see that these are all unsalted, and really that's all I buy because that's what I tend to use most often. Now, if you do like a little bit extra of that salt taste in your baked goods, just add a little extra salt. It'll cause you a whole lot less problems in the long run. Okay, number 4 are weights versus cup measurements. I know being in the US, a lot of people are really stuck on using cup measurements, but it's really not consistent. And if you want to have or double a recipe, you really want to be using the weights so that you can make sure your product always turns out optimal. So I just have this little scale. I believe I got this at Walmart. You can get them on Amazon as well. I did drop mine one day and crack it, but it does still work, so that's cool. And then I have a measuring cup here because I just want to quickly show you guys how different each cup that you measure can turn out. So I have my big thing of flour here. And this is another good little flour tip. If you just absolutely refuse to use weight measurements, I do provide both weights and cups on my blog, but again, I prefer you use the weights because I measure it every single time I make a recipe, so you're gonna use exactly how much I use. So if you buy a big container to put your flour in, you can scoop a little more accurately, but this is how I scoop my flour. I like to fluff it up a little and then grab like a really big generous scoop. And then you can either take a knife or your finger and swipe it across the top. But that right there is how I tend to measure my flour. Okay, so there's my measuring cup. My measuring cup weighs 79 grams. So I'm gonna tear it, zero it out. Okay, so now if I measure a cup of flour, that's 132 grams. Now, somebody else, let's just scoop it a little differently. I'm just gonna go and grab a scoop and shake it off again and put it back up here. Well, that's 132 grams. I've tried this a bunch of times on my own because I was really curious, but I tend to scoop flour the same every time, so it's kind of hard for me to change. But I'm gonna pack some flour in here because I know people are big about packing it in there. All right. Now we got 145 grams. That extra 10 to 12 grams is definitely going to change the outcome of your recipe because it's extra flour in there. But it goes the same with your liquids and your butters and things like this. Everything you put in it, if you change the equivalent that you put in there, it's going to change the outcome of it. So I do recommend the weights. If you just refuse to do weights, then go ahead and use your measuring cups. But make sure you're not packing sugar. Make sure you're not packing the flour in there, even the sugar. Don't pack your ingredients into the measuring cups. Fluff it up a little, get you a generous scoop, and level it off. You're gonna come a whole lot closer to what you should be using doing it that way. Another thing that you should watch out for though is your different buying flours from different places, just like the butter. Like what I have in here right now is Publix flour, just their brand. And I've noticed it seems a little more dense than like Walmart's flour. So that's another thing to kind of think about when you're buying different ingredients from different places. Number 5, pan sizes. When you're using a recipe, 9 times out of 10, let's say it's a cake, and they put up their prepare 2 8-inch cake pans. That's for you to understand that that amount of batter that you're going to make with that is going to work the best in 2 8-inch pans. Now I know everybody doesn't need an 8-inch cake. Maybe you need a 10-inch cake. Maybe you only need a 6-inch cake. You have to adjust A, the amount of batter, and B, the amount of time you're going to cook it for whenever you're using a different pan size than the recipe calls for. I see, and I get this a lot, is a message. Ken, my cake came out wrong and I need to know why. I always ask like a few basic questions to start off because 9 times out of 10, it's one of these top 3 things, but one of them is, what size pan did you use? And they'll say, oh, well, I used 2 12-inch pans, and now I have these pancakes. I'm like, well, the recipe was made for an 8-inch pan. So if you want it in a 12-inch pan, you obviously are gonna need some more batter. You do need to try to follow what the recipe suggests for your pan size so that you can get the best results possible. All right, so the next thing we're gonna talk about is baking times. I always put a decent little range on my recipes about a baking time. You know, you'll see like 8 to 12 minutes. And I've gotten why do you have such a big gap there? Well, because, for instance, sugar cookies. Some people prefer their sugar cookies a little on the, I'm not gonna say raw or underbaked, but right on the edge of that. So you get a little bit of a softer bite, a little bit of a smoother cookie, but some people prefer a little bit of brown around the edge. So you're gonna have, obviously, a different amount of time you're gonna bake for, but it also depends widely on where you're located. If you're in a super humid environment, you may even have to go past that recommended baking time because you have a very humid area. Flip side, you live in a very dry area, your stuff's probably gonna bake a little bit faster, it's gonna come out a little bit different, so you're gonna go on the low end of that scale. This is why you can't really just go bake this for 8 minutes. Now I can say I always bake this for 8 minutes, but you may have to bake it for 14 minutes. So take that into consideration anytime you're baking anything, because you can check it at that low end and go, yeah, I kind of want it to go a little bit further. And then, like I said again, you may even go past that. So just use it as a guide. This is the one thing in baking where you should use something as a guide and not a rule, is the baking time. Okay, this is my last tip. Keep in mind that different baking mats, whether you're using parchment, silicone mat, even different silicone mats are going to vary, but different things that you're baking on are also going to change a little bit of how it bakes and how long it bakes, as well as pans. You have pans that have like the nonstick coating, and you have hard anodized pans. These are going to bake different as well. I tend to prefer a heavyweight, light colored pan because those bake the best for me. Baking mats, it depends on what I'm baking. Sometimes parchment paper is best, but sometimes a silicone mat is going to work the best. So sometimes you have where parchment paper is going to be best. Sometimes you have Teflon, which is a great in-between on parchment paper and silicone. And there's even the perforated like eclair mats that are great for sugar cookies. That's another discussion. But these are going to change the amount of time, sometimes even the temperature that you bake at. But those are things that you have to just kind of use and experiment in your own oven and environment what's going to work best for you. But in conclusion, I want you guys to remember that when you're just beginning something, or maybe you're just learning how to do a different type of dessert, pick a recipe and really follow the directions and the techniques. And then once you go through and you take your notes and you figure out that, okay, this is basically how I do this, you can change it up and you can be creative once you've learned how to actually make the product. Because I do always encourage everyone to be creative and make their own flavors and make all kinds of different things. But follow the recipe. Keep in mind that there are reasons why certain things happen and why certain ingredients react to one another. So learn those basics, but always have fun. If you ever have any questions, any problems, any tips, let me know. I'm always around.